Greetings, everybody. My name's Jono Brent, and as always, joined with Marc Pringle for our In Your Corner podcast. But we're doing things a bit differently today. We thought we would experiment with a video version as opposed to the audio one that we've been doing for the first 10 or 11 podcasts. And so it's fantastic for Marc and I to be able to spend some time today reflecting on the podcast series to date. Probably just sort of lock in some learnings and just things that we've discovered and really just explore it. And it's a great opportunity all these times that we get to do this is we get to look at our own journeys through things like identity and going beyond the predictable. But before we get into the formal part, as always, like to just give a brief introduction about who In Your Corner is. We're a group of strategic advisors and we help organisations close the gap between strategy and execution. And to be able to do that, they usually have to go beyond their predictable. But what we've learnt through the work we've done so far is for organisations to do that, we first have to help individuals go beyond theirs, hence the name of our podcast. And throughout our podcast, we've been exploring with our guests just some of the things that created who they are and the challenges they've faced and how they've gone beyond their predictable. So it's been a fantastic journey. And Marc, before we kick into sort of even the formal part of this, we've had, 10 or 11 guests from a wide variety. We've learnt a lot. What are your reflections, learnings, and things that you would have discovered during this process?
Yeah, well, it's just a great opportunity to pause and reflect after a number of those podcasts. I think the first thing is just huge gratitude to all of the guests for turning up and the way that they turned up and shared what they shared. I mean, a lot of it was deep personal stories about who they are and how they got to be that way, and including some, really difficult formative events. And so I just appreciate them and willingness to share that publicly.
Yeah.
And, I think, you and I have spoken about this. We got a lot out of it, but we hope a lot of our listeners did as well. The second thing is just, the understanding that everyone has these challenging experiences, before the age of 20, and yet everyone seems to find a way to adapt to them and find a way to survive them and then become really successful as a result of that. And I just think my reflection is that, we're not on our own with those difficult events. But I think we often feel like we're on our own because we've gone through them. But everyone actually goes through them, and then everyone finds a way to adapt and do it reasonably successfully. So I think for me, the reflection is that these are human conditions that are not unique to one person. And,
No.
And the ability to talk openly and share them, to me is often what's missing in organisations, but also just missing with people being able to talk about who they are.
Absolutely. One of the other interesting things, isn't it, that often people will go through maybe the same sort of challenges, but have quite different responses.
Yes.
As in you can have sort of virtually the same circumstances as a young person or young adolescent, etc. But the way you adapt can be quite different.
That's right.
And it's just really interesting watching people how at that time, whenever that occurred to them, they made a decision, possibly nearly on the spot.
Yes.
And it worked, and they repeated it. But it's just then another different person can have totally different responses.
Yes. Yeah.
And they then go on completely different lives.
That's right.
I thought it was really interesting. But and the other one that really struck me was probably how we talk about this going beyond the predictable, and we'll talk a bit more about it in a second, but people have this innate ability to do that. Often the challenge is what triggers it to occur in different circumstances, and even yours and mine, which we'll explore. But so it's not like it's a capability gap.
No.
But something causes it to occur.
Yeah.
And that's just really worth exploring because in some ways the biggest question is how do we trigger it rather than it be triggered.
That's right.
So so we'll get to explore that. But like you, just thanks to our guest, some of the vulnerability was actually very humbling to hear, and they shared openly, and we learnt a lot. So, but Marc, I got a couple of questions. The way we'll do this today is I'll pose you some questions. We'll share some examples and things like that, and some of it will make up, and some of it will be structured. That's the way this is the way we always work. This phrase "going beyond the predictable." We talk about it a lot, but maybe it's worthwhile. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing we've probably got to establish is that when we refer to the word predictable, we don't attach any meaning to that. So, not that the predictable future is bad or wrong or invalid or anything like that. And we certainly don't intend to have any of our guests or any people that we work with reflect on their predictable and see it as a bad future. The question is, are you able to confront your predictable? And when I think about what makes the future so predictable, I think there's two parts to it. Is that, as we know, and you can look back on your life on this, and you know that your life is full of ups and downs and opportunities and problems or threats and things that come your way, and those come and go, and you don't have much control over those, right? But what we do have control on is the way we respond to those circumstances or navigate them, and through the work we've done, Jono, with our clients, but also on the podcast, is that we sort of we see a predictability in the way people respond to those circumstances. And if you look really closely and you look at people's past and they look at their own past, they can see a sort of a predictable pattern of the way that they've handled those circumstances. And again, that's not right or wrong. It's just the way that they've managed to survive them or adapt to them. And so if you think about it this way, is that that everyone has a predictable future. It is predictable in the fact that you've got ups and downs, and it's predictable that you'll navigate those ups and downs from your historical patterns of behaviour. And the question is not whether that's the right thing to do. The question is that what people want?
Yep.
Is that what is going to have them fulfilled or create the impacts that they want to have? And that's a big part of looking at whether your predictable future is actually the one that you want. And that's what I mean by predictable.
Yeah.
Consistent with you?
Yeah, I think so. There's we repeat things, don't we? Like you say, and largely because they work.
Yes.
We the first time we did it, we fumbled it, and then the second time we got better, and then all of a sudden, and to a point where, which we use the phrase, it becomes default.
That's right.
Like you don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah.
We often jokingly say it's like in the startup menu. It's in the source code.
Yes.
Because you've done it so often.
Yes.
That it becomes default.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bit that, and of course, and as you said earlier, default you often can work.
Yeah.
And it becomes repeatable, and without thinking, the brain just goes run that operating system again, and it works. So so we use the phrase default identity. So what does that mean? Like,
yeah, look, and as far as we understand it, and the work that obviously we've done on ourselves and with our own coaching and other experts, is that we. Prior to the age of 20, we have these sort of formative experiences, and we talk about them on each of the podcasts. The three experiences are that the first time you face something, on your own without your parents or family or guardians around you, the safety and security that they often provide. The second one is where you don't belong, you don't fit in, or you feel like you don't fit in. And the third one is where you fail at something or you let other people down or embarrass yourself. And so, and just remembering that these are the first time a human being has faced those types of, and they bring up all sorts of uncomfortable feelings and anxieties and all of those sorts of things. And we find a way to adapt to them. And so we see default identity being made up of what we call adaptive strategies. So, the adaptive strategy is that they help us succeed, they help us gain approval, they help us stay safe and stay protected or feel secure in ourselves. And that largely works. And what we don't focus on is what the event was and analysing that. We just focus more on that you adapted and you adapted a certain way and it worked. But then there's times in life where those adaptive behaviours don't work. And So they work most of the time, but there's times where they don't, or situations where they don't, and that's when these things called maladaptive behaviours or strategies kick in, or also known as counterproductive behaviours. And all of those are still grounded in trying to keep us safe and keep us secure and feel like we belong, or at least not be excluded, etc. But they're like the worst of us. That's how I relate to them. And it's the sort of worst behaviour, or it's the difficult personalities that often come out in those situations. But again, I don't look at those in terms of they're good or bad or right or wrong. They're intelligent survival or coping mechanisms that we have developed, I think, largely subconsciously to protect ourselves. And then, as you said, we keep using them, and because we keep using them, we get stronger and stronger at them. And then we think that's all we are. And as we've often talked about before, I am really challenged by some of the, personality assessments and things out there, because I think that often they confirm or cement or
they lock you in,
or lock us into thinking that, even our greatest strengths is that which I think a lot of have been formed in response to those difficult circumstances, is all who we are. And again, it's not wrong. It's just predictable.
It is.
That we're going that default is going to show up, especially under pressure, or especially in circumstances where there's ambiguity and uncertainty and potential risk to an individual.
I mean, I probably, just as I listen to Mark, just personal reflection in my own identity about, back in high school days, I remember it was hard to fit in. I was from a small country school going into a bigger high school. I was sort of overweight. I was never really in the popular crowd. But when I felt uncomfortable, what I worked out was I could use humour to help me navigate that circumstance. And of course, that worked.
Yes.
And so started to become that.
Yes.
And did it more and more. And I still use it today.
Yeah.
But I also realise there are times when my humour's not appropriate to certain circumstances. But what it isn't about the humour, it's about the feeling of uncomfortableness and how quickly I roll out the humour response to deal with that.
Yes.
And the other one is when I feel out of control, is just the control mechanism just absolutely hammers in there.
Yeah.
And it's got, it's got payoffs.
Yes.
It deals with it. It makes the uncomfortableness go away.
Yeah.
But I also know that it comes with some challenges that I have to deal with. Is there anything that you notice about yourself?
Oh, look, it's
we've only got an hour, Mark.
Yeah, we've only got an hour.
Sorry, there's that humour coming in.
The one is my go-to adaptive strategy is independence and self-reliance, and I feel like I've told the story to you 100 times, but I went to 5 different schools and lived in 14 different houses. Just because we moved with my father's job, and it was all for positive reasons. But often the feeling of I didn't belong, or I didn't fit in, or I found it difficult to fit in, and so so ultimately there's a fear of being excluded or fear of not fitting in, and my adaptive strategy to deal with that now that I've done this work is that I thought, well, I must have subconsciously done this, which is if I'm self-reliant and independent, I don't need to fit in.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, it makes me really resilient, because I can rely on myself in any situation, even in amongst immense change. But the challenge with it is, whenever difficult circumstances show up or it's challenges, my default would be I'd take things on my own or be independent about it. And as you know, like, that works in some cases, but in other cases it's very limiting and causes a whole lot of other challenges. But independence and self-reliance, the lone wolf or independent Ian, as I jokingly call it, has been there for a long time, and it served me well in lots of cases, but is also extremely limiting at times. So
I think it's circling back to your point earlier, Mark, about how predictable isn't bad.
Yes.
I mean, for you and I, launching In Your Corner was going beyond our predictable. and both of us were operating in pretty successful executive roles, and we could have carried on that way. There was sort of nothing. There was nothing overtly wrong with that predictable.
Yeah.
But it's sort of also there was sort of like there's an internal challenge about what is it? Is that default, and is it fully fulfilling? That's the bit that I think is the challenge. And I remember when we were going through this, and for me, I'd built this mentality that I had to be security and financial for the family and all this sort of thing, and I'd become a chief executive at an early age and thought, well, that's what I'm now supposed to be.
Yes.
But then challenged by, why am I not feeling fulfilled?
Yes.
Or at least probably more so is this predictable future going to fulfill on the future I actually want? And until I actually made that, it became present with that.
Yes.
And that's the bit about, sort of like, why, there's something really powerful about even knowing about your default identity. So why do you think it's important to even just bring it into the conscious? Because a lot of people are living successful lives from their default identity. So why bring it into the...
Yeah, well, I think the first thing you mentioned is just important, is that, there's nothing wrong with your default identity. It's a clever, intelligent, adaptive strategy that you've formed that works a lot of the time. And then you mentioned, it can still give you success.
Yeah.
Whether it be, you're getting a good job or earning money or being effective at sport or whatever it is that you're into. We're not talking about whether it gives you success or not. We're talking about whether you get fulfillment from it.
Yeah, that's quite different, isn't it? Yep.
And so many people I think we deal with, and including very senior people, are very successful, right? Most of our clients are in there, right? CEOs, executives and senior leaders, they're very successful. But we often ask the question, are you fulfilled, or are you having the impact that you want to have? Are you getting meaning from the work? And often it's not really, or only part of the time.
Yep.
And so this distinction between, achievement versus fulfillment, I think is a really critical one. And then the bringing it conscious for me is about, I've found that unless it's conscious, it is like your default operating system, and it's running you.
Yeah.
And I struggle with the fact that this thing is running my life, and I'm not in control of it. It's running me, and it's grounded in the fears or unmet needs from my childhood. Right?
Yeah.
And so now when I'm confronted with a challenging situation or a big opportunity, I can now say it's predictable that my default identity, my independence and self-reliance, or yours might be people-pleasing or keeping people happy, is going to be the predictable response. Now, up until doing this work, that would have just happened immediately.
Yep.
There would have been no control over it. Now I can pause and say, is that approach, or does this situation call for self-reliance and independence, and is that going to create the future I want? And but unless you're fully aware of it and accounting for the costs of it, and also understanding that the reason you deploy it is to prevent or avoid the fear, then it will just deploy you.
Yeah.
And
and
it's very confronting because, and as we've talked about, I've probably lived the vast majority of my life since childhood in my default identity. And then you go, well, if I've been living that way, even if it's been successful, but I haven't had fulfillment, then that's a lot of years wasted living in a default.
Yeah.
And
I remember really early on in some coaching work I did, I got asked the question, are you the reader of your life story, or are you the author of your life story? And at that time I was like,
what are they on about?
What are you on about?
Yeah.
And now I get it. Like, am I a reader of the story caused by my default identity, or am I authoring it? But I also just remember that it's really confronting when this conversation is created, because I remember when I'd done the work to create the future I wanted, which I just summed up as flexible at 55. It wasn't about what I'd be doing, but I just wanted this ability to be flexible.
The way your life
the
would
way
be.
my life would be.
Yeah.
And then I looked back at all the pathways to get that, and the lowest scoring one was the role that I was in. I had about 4 pathways, and I ranked them all to a sort of a sophisticated system, and I was really confronted but I'd spent my life trying to become that, or my default identity had driven me to become that.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, I had this sort of like I couldn't. It was really hard to sort of explain that. This sort of like, how can I be a person who's been driven to there? But then when I look back from my future, it's just not a match.
Yeah.
And it took me a while. I tried to suppress that. I tried to convince myself that, that I shouldn't be thinking like that. I should be on the same path.
Yes.
And just immediately my identity just threw up blockers.
Yeah.
You couldn't make money out of this. There'd be no security. You haven't got enough skills. It basically, I call my identity like a missile defense system.
Yeah.
As soon as you want to take on something bigger than it knows how to handle, it just sends out the blockers and convinces you not to.
That's right.
And in some ways, if you maintain your default identity, you'll listen to those blockers.
Yeah.
But as I said before, there are then some circumstances that get loose or get past the blockers, usually caused by some sort of event.
Yes.
You and I both Christchurch earthquake, could be, could be natural disasters, could be some people lose their jobs,
or death of family members.
Yeah, in your case, death of family member and things like that. And all of a sudden, it's like our default can't handle that, and we're now in the unknown.
That's right.
And that's something that is kind of frightening.
Yeah.
And your identity will try and grab you and pull you back.
Yeah.
And somewhat is like, how do you live? How do you express yourself outside in that unknown? And the more you know about your default, the more you'll probably be able to at least even, participate in the unknown.
Well, I think there's a couple of things about, that we're not always our default, and there's been plenty of times in our life that we've operated beyond our default. I think often we're blind to those, or we're not fully conscious of them. But I don't want any people listening to this or watching it thinking that we're only our default. I think there's plenty of times where we're operating beyond that already, but we don't sort of understand when we are and why we are. And for me, that's a really important place to look. Is you look back at your past. When have I operated out of fear, or avoiding the fear or unmet need, and operating as my adaptive strategy? Or when have I operated really authentically, just as a sort of a natural expression of who I am? And if you can distinguish those two, then you can see a couple of things. You can see that you are more than your default identity. And then secondly, you can create the conditions in which you are way more, authentic or beyond your default, and that gives you power back, or gives the ability to create that. So it's it's been able to reflect back on your life and do that work. I think is just a critical starting point.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned before a couple of the different identities. Yours is self-reliance, independence, and I'm in the people pleaser, harmonizer.
Yep.
We both are well aware of that.
Yep.
And but there's a few others that. What are the other sort of common ones that you've observed in your coaching programs?
Oh, look, there's a long list, and these are just some labels that often get bandied around. But there's peacemaker and harmonizer, and then there's the controller / perfectionist, the achiever / performer, the caretaker / pleaser. There's the rescuer, constantly, or rescuer protector, constantly looking to protect people or rescue people. Avoider, withdrawer, and it's important that people can have multiple of these.
I was going to say, I probably recognise myself in 3 or 4 of those. It's not one. There's obviously there's a dominant one.
I think there is a dominant one, and more broadly, I think there's people that are more withdrawal, whereas some are more dominant and all of that. But the important bit is to understand, your own one, and how it formed, and how it shows up for you in your life, as opposed to, everyone has to be perfectly categorised, and there is one category, and I don't think that's the case.
And it's also interesting, just in my own reflection about how sometimes the circumstances trigger certain ones. Like when I travel in New Zealand, I'm quite happy to go with the flow.
Yeah.
I notice that when I'm international and I don't know the conditions,
Yeah.
my control mechanism kicks up
Yes.
rapidly,
Yeah.
much to the disgruntlement of my family when I try and maneuver them round
Yeah.
based on under my instruction. But it's funny how it's some sort of circumstances. And the feeling of being out of control, and then all of a sudden it triggers something that isn't there all the time, but certain things trigger it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like often I think it's times of uncertainty, ambiguity, where we feel at risk, we feel under threat in some form, and it might not be that the threat's yet real, but we think we're going into that environment. And it's those types of situations, which is going to be different for me compared to you, even, that you have to be sort of really aware of and do the work to understand what are the conditions or environments where, those fears or worries or uncertainties are going to more show up for you. Because when you get a handle on that, then you can, really quickly say is, when in those types of environment, it is predictable, my default identity will take over. And it's all designed to protect yourself or keep you safe. And again, that might be the right thing to do or the best thing to do, but are you consciously choosing it, or is it choosing you in that moment?
And it's sort of I'm just reflecting as a couple of the guests. I remember when Jen Dale, when we had her, and she talked about how she was sort of thrust into that role of being responsible.
Yes.
And and so she is just now a manifestation of responsibility,
That's
which
right.
everyone loves about her. And she's like, but it absolutely controls her and her ability to be irresponsible.
Yeah.
Just sort of feels reckless, and so
That's
it's just
right.
interesting how but other people who may have been thrust into the same thing about being made responsible in the young age, later on we go like, I'm not going to be responsible anymore. I'm done with this.
That's
So
right.
you have a very different responses.
Briar's another one that springs to mind is I think is the sort of the good girl. I need to be the good girl and make sure people view me as I'm the good girl.
Yeah.
And so when you think about when she might be challenged or under difficult circumstances, her goal is to make sure that she is seen as the good girl, as opposed to the goal of what is the impact I want to have here, or what am I actually trying to achieve. The goal becomes the managing the fear or worry. And again, being a good girl is an incredible adaptive strategy. It's just not going to be effective in every situation. And as she talked about, it's exhausting because you're constantly worried about your perception in the eyes of others. So
but there's as we've probably started to explore, is that for each of these there's payoffs and costs.
Yes.
What is explain that to us in your view.
Yeah, well, the payoffs or the benefits of these adaptive and even maladaptive or counterproductive strategies are like the short-term or immediate dopamine hit that we get from it. And I sort of like to think of it, why do we keep doing these things even though we know that they're limited? Yeah. And even though we've got all the logic in the world to know, all the intellectual knowledge available at the drop of a hat to explain why you shouldn't operate a certain
Sometimes you're in the middle of doing it and you're actually telling yourself, don't do it.
Yeah.
But it's like a magnetic force that's coming out of you anyway.
Yeah. Like I know in certain situations that me trying to take on something on my own, I know logically it's not the right thing to do, but I keep doing it. And so it's not an intellectual knowledge issue. Why we keep doing it is there's these immediate payoffs and
well, it works, doesn't it? It works.
It works.
Yeah.
And when we say it works, it keeps the fear or unmet need managed.
It deals with it.
It deals with it.
Yep.
It either avoids it or prevents it or mitigates it, and we get we feel good about that, or we get some level of pride or comfort. Like, you'll know this being a people pleaser, when you please people and you feel good about
feel
it.
good.
You feel good about it.
Yeah.
Even though you might have given up what was important to you,
Yep.
you feel good in the short term about pleasing people. And so you get this hit of dopamine, and you feel good, and then you want to repeat it. But I think the bigger thing is we get to avoid whatever it is that we're worried about. And so, you know, and then as you know, on the other side of the coin of payoffs are the costs, right? What do you see as the costs?
Well, I mean, just it's sort of like the cost of things like maybe a cost to your relationships, cost to your well-being, you know, things like that. As I was reflecting this whole thing about, you know, when I'm traveling internationally, I need to control. By controlling, it sorts it out. It gets rid of my fear, and it makes it work.
Yes.
But the long-term cost to those around me, my relationship, my well-being, the stress that I put on myself to do so. So there's a cost. I think the difference, isn't it, is that the benefits are immediate. The costs may not show up for a while.
That's right.
And so therefore why we, like in humans, we're always good at trading off future cost as long as we get a short-term benefit. So I think that's the trickiest thing about your identity or default response, is that it works.
Yes.
And you often don't necessarily see the costs until a later date. You know, for me, things like it usually shows up in well-being. It usually shows up in my sleep. Yeah. And you know, what I then do is I try and deal with the sleep. But actually, I've got to go back to what caused me to trigger that in the first place. Yeah. Not like I can fix the sleep. Yeah. But that doesn't mean I haven't dealt with the reason why it ended up there.
And that's at an individual level. And I often look at the costs of default identities to a whole organisation and its performance. And so, as you know, everyone constantly talks about how much organisations need to be able to adapt quickly and be agile and be responsive, and then they wonder why that's difficult, and they try and deal with it through, you know, process and restructures and agile methodologies, which all have their place. But what I think we've experienced is that in times of uncertainty and change, what's actually happening for individuals, and you know, let's face it, an organisation is just made up of a collection of individuals, is you're having everyone's default identity raging in all different ways. You know, some being dominant and aggressive, and others being, you know, withdrawal, and are all trying to help those people survive. But I think they're getting in the way of those individuals adapting quickly to what the organisation needs or to its operating environment. And so I think there's a real cost to performance of organisations and their ability to adapt quickly and respond. And because, again, most people aren't aware of their adaptive or maladaptive strategies, and let alone why they're doing it. So
I think you see a real example in businesses, don't you, where you go, people might be operating from an identity of fear of conflict and wanting to be liked, which often then triggers an avoidance response. Yes. Because avoidance means you don't have to deal with conflict or not being liked. So if you've got a whole organisation of avoiders, which is not uncommon, you know, then it's not surprising that their organisation isn't dealing with what needs to be dealt with. Yes. So their performance as an organisation becomes as much as we can achieve while avoiding anything that needs to be. That's right. That could cause conflict. Yeah. And then and then you get someone might enter that organisation who doesn't mind that and starts getting a bit more forthright in their responses, and they just get abjectly rejected by the organisation. You don't fit here. Yeah. We're a bunch of avoiders. Not that that's talked about. No. But you can sort of see that performance is just so limited. It's not that it's bad; it could still be quite good, but it's like untapped potential. Yeah, and I think the normal response is to try and train people and give them more knowledge about, you know, how to have courageous conversations. Which I'm not saying isn't valuable. I'm just saying that if you've got someone who's operated from a fear of conflict because they've got a fear of exclusion or looking bad from their childhood, then and they don't deal with that underlying fear or unmet need, and then so they've still got the fear and unmet need, and then you train them in courageous conversations,
They're going to deploy courageous conversations from their identity of avoiding the fear. So they'll use the knowledge.
They'll use the tool
They'll use
or
the
the
tool,
process or whatever
but
it is.
it'll be deployed from
Yep.
the fear. And again, it might be an improvement to whatever was there before, but I still don't think it's going to be, it's not going to be transformational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is quite deep work, though, Mark, isn't it? And we've discovered through our own journey how important coaching is. You and I have both been lucky enough to have coaching for the last sort of 8 to 10 years. But so why do you think coaching is, you talked about, most people would go like on a training course or a development course, but why do you think coaching is so vital when it comes to identity work?
Yeah, and I think there's coaching, there's one word for it. There's lots of different words you could use in counselling or psychotherapy. They all have their place, but for me it's about helping an individual fully understand who they are and how they got to be that way without making any of that wrong.
Yep.
But to understand how much of their current behaviours, particularly in difficult or challenging circumstances, are tied to those early unmet needs and fears, and helping people navigate that. It's very difficult to do that on your own. You can do it, but it's really difficult. Help to do that in a way that where they feel safe to talk about that and they're willing to go there, which takes, as you say, reflection and the willingness to look into your past and willingness to look into the mirror. Because I find that if people don't do that work, then the solution must be out there somewhere. I'll try and change my environment or change people around me, but I won't deal with my unmet need or fear that I've had for a couple of decades. And I just think through and it's been our experience, hasn't it? It's that when you deal with that, it gives you a lot more freedom and control back, because you can now choose to be something beyond your default.
Yep.
But if you're not aware of your default,
Yeah.
it's probably going to be more of your default, just in a different
double
way.
down.
Yeah,
I think it's we're privileged to get to work with a lot of organisations, and even though we're donkey deep in this and we live and breathe this, we're still subject to the default identity response. And so we always find that one of the things I find the hardest is that when you take on a new client, the first thing we have to do before even considering how we're going to help them is how do we transform our own view or identity before we worry about transforming them, because otherwise we're just going to coach or develop from our default identity, which once again isn't good or bad, it just is. But you if you don't really confront that, I'm trying to draw up this thought process is that okay, I've got a circumstance that I have to deal with. Is my default identity going to be the right one for this circumstance, or do I have to do something different to that? So it's not necessarily like trying to say right or wrong. And a lot of the time my default identity will be fine, but there are some circumstances where I'll have to dial. I have to sort of somehow park people pleaser, harmonizer, and just go, what does this situation need? And that's, I think, something that that's if you can be more conscious to that. I like the concept that it actually brings choice.
Yes.
Rather than right, wrong. It's just straight out choice.
Choice. Yep.
And it's and the other one I say to a lot of my coaching clients is you don't have to holistically change your identity or challenge your identity. It might just be for the next 10 seconds.
Yeah.
You might have to just I'm going to bring something out that needs to be out in the open, and then once it's out in the open, I'll deal with it.
Yeah.
And so it's not about I have to change my being of who I are permanently.
No.
It's just what's needed right now in this circumstance, and is my default response the right one? That's right. And that's just sometimes makes it a little easier to go, it's just for this period. So, Mark, we're getting close to the end of our time, but so it's like sum up. It's someone say it's quite theoretical to go, what does it actually take to go beyond your default identity? Like, how do you consciously do it?
Yeah, like I don't want this to sound like it's the answer because I don't think it is the answer, or there is one answer to it. But at least the way that that I've experienced it is the first thing, as we've talked about a lot, is you've firstly got to be fully confront your default. You've got to fully understand it, why it happens, without judging it or criticising yourself or what have you, and then understand the conditions in which it's more likely to show up. And, you know, but I find often that, you know, a lot of coaching is orientated towards, you know, what future do you want or what goal do you want? But I feel like often that gets done from inside the default identity. So getting really clear on that first. And the next bit is dealing with this question of where do you get fulfillment, or what impact do you want to have that would have you fulfilled? And, you know, that's usually something, you know, for a lot of people, and just throughout all of our coaching, we often find there's common themes. So people often get fulfillment where they're connected, you know, where they feel belonging to something, and also where they're creating an impact that's way bigger than themselves. You know, when it's just about them and their job or their career, that's not fulfillment. That's sort of more like achievement. And, you know, we often joke, Jono, don't we, which we often ask leaders, very senior leaders, what is it that you actually want? What impact do you want to have? And most people haven't been able to answer that.
No.
And these are very senior people with, you know, big responsibilities, high-stake industries. What they can tell you is what their husband or wife want of them, or partner, what their children want of them, what their board want of them, what their colleagues need from them, what their staff need from them. And but they can't really articulate it as what impact did they stand for. And so what we've found is that in the absence of being able to do the work on that question, that are largely responding to what everyone else wants of them. And they'll respond in all different manners of different ways, and including from their default identity, and also do a very good job of it. But, you know, it's really important, we think, is that once you're clear on your default identity and how you've been operating, is then to have a future that you can orientate to, but it's got to be a future that is going to pull for you to operate beyond your default, rather than a future that you already know you can achieve from your default identity. And then the next bit, which is the bit that you and I, you know, probably would say has been the biggest catalyst for us, which is to make some declarations. Which is, I'm going to declare something without fully knowing how I'm going to do it, knowing that I'm going to have to go beyond my default. I'm going to have to step into the unknown. I'm going to have to find a new way to operate. And so it becomes, you know, for us, setting up In Your Corner was like that. We did two things. We quit our exec jobs, so it created a burning platform. And then we made a commitment to set up In Your Corner, and because of the impact we wanted to have, and then we were in a gap, you know, and we knew that I couldn't rely on self-reliance and independence to do it, and you couldn't rely on people-pleasing, and you know, and we had to find a way. But I guess the other element to it is, which is we haven't done it alone. We've done it together, but we've also had coaches. We've had a great team of In Your Corner group around us, because trying to navigate this stuff on your own is probably the biggest mistake I've made. Is you think you can do it, and then you manage to justify and convince to yourself to keep operating the same way you've been doing. But when you've got a group of trusted people around you that can call you on it, like you can call me on, Mark, you're being independent, self-reliant, you've been too much of that, thanks. And I can call you on being people-pleaser, right? And it's all done in service of, you know, creating something as opposed to trying to stop it.
Yeah, that's right. I think just reflecting on something you said before about that awareness and the triggers. I learnt really early on that you know, when you start getting aware, I think there's three distinct stages. You catch yourself after the act, and you sort of give yourself 50 floggings, and I won't do that again. But you didn't notice till after in the reflection. Second is, and this is when you start to get that presence to it, is catching yourself in the act.
Yes.
And then at least you have a choice in the moment.
Yes.
That brings, and I always say the Jedi Knight status is understanding the circumstances that are most likely to trigger it,
Yes.
and preparing in advance.
That's right.
And I think that's the one that I think that if that gives you, and then you've got choice in advance, and you can do some creation and things like that. But it also then gives you the opportunity to go, which is your pull from the future. What would future me do if they were living that full life? In my case, flexible at 55. What would future me do in this right in this circumstance right now?
That's right.
And so to be future me would have had to have said no to things.
Yeah.
And then I can go, I'll just dial up future me. It was future me that created that I can say no. Whereas if I'm in the current and living just the defaultness, I've got my power to I'll just say yes, because I've got nothing of which to deal with. So, but the other thing too there is just that whole burning platform, burning ambition, isn't it? We've seen with all of our guests and even in our own cases, and a lot of the times when people are going beyond their predictable, it's because of the burning platform.
Yes.
And burning platform makes you've virtually got no choice.
Yeah.
Either you've had some sort of personal issue, or you've reached the bottom and you have to confront it. But burning platform creates a speed response, but I think burning ambition creates a big response. It requires a constant recommitment too. You're a ultra marathon runner. We've created this thing. You don't just commit once. You commit. Partway through your commitment or trying to achieve that commitment, your default identity will show up again and try and go, do you really not think we could just live a normal life and forget all this crazy plans and things like that? So I think it's just the ability to not only have that declaration at the start, but then the constant declaration is critical, because otherwise, in some ways, the safety of your default identity will try and pull you back.
Yeah.
I just think that's just so important. In some ways, when you and I set up in your corner, our first declaration, when we look back now, it looks...
It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing what we set ourselves, our target for the first 6 months, but because we did it after 6, and then we recommitted to the next 12 and next 12. And now you start to look at it and go, actually, we could just about do whatever we say we want to do, but we have to declare it and commit to it.
And I think you mentioned about, what is all this in service of? And I sort of think about it's in service of having choice in your life.
Yeah.
And I think what we've learned is that when you exercise the muscle of choosing outside of the circumstances or despite the circumstances, you realise that you can keep making choices instead of having just to live the rest of your life responding to circumstances and responding from your default identity. And you could say that slightly differently, which is you could end up just surviving circumstances.
Yeah.
That becomes, and I think a lot of my life was like that. I think a lot of our clients' lives have been like that. But when they see themselves operating with choice towards a future that's important to them and those they care about, they get fulfilment and they can see that they can keep choosing.
Yeah.
And to me, that is the ultimate freedom, I think.
Yeah, brilliant. Mate, we're pretty lucky we're going to be able to carry on our podcast series. We're going to interview all sorts of people. We've got some plans to be able to create more, but we've got to keep delving into this identity thing. But I suppose to be faithful to all of our guests and to sort of sign this off, as we always finish the question, is like, if you got in a time machine and went back and talked to the 18-year-old version of yourself, what advice would you have? And given that we've asked them that, I suppose it's only fair that we ask ourselves that. Have you thought about that version of 18-year-old Marc Pringle?
Well, the 18-year-old Mark would only listen from his default identity, I suspect. So he would only listen to things that fit within his worldview. And so if we put that aside, and I got the guy to genuinely listen, I would say, do you want to have a life of responding to circumstances, responding to what everyone else wants of you, even though that could be successful, or do you want to have a life where you choose your own path and still make mistakes, still get lots of stuff wrong? But I think, I was so orientated to minimising the fear or preventing failure, I could say, And that motivated me to be successful, but it didn't give me any fulfillment.
Yep.
And so I'd probably say, to sum up, do you want to respond to circumstances, or do you want to choose? And
Yep.
And if I say to any younger listeners out there, is are you choosing for yourself, or are you choosing in response to what other people
Yep.
want of you?
I suppose it means
What
I have
about
to
you?
respond,
Yeah,
don't I?
it'd be great to have your response.
So I think that the desire to be liked and be valued and feel like I was achieving is how much I was driven by the need to say yes to anything that was asked of me. So like it was like if they asked me, it meant they wanted me, and then if I did it, it meant that I was of value, etc. All of those sort of things. So I spent my first part of my working career in this whole mode of I have to say yes to everything. And interestingly, by saying yes to everything, the cost of probably I didn't perform that well against all those things, or probably to my own well-being, etc. and things like that. As opposed to I've learnt and I'm still learning, is that by saying no and being more picky about what I do, I can actually have more impact, which is kind of sort of counterintuitive to I thought that quantity was impact.
Yes.
So if I said yes to 100 things and did them all, then I must be having 100 impacts.
Yeah.
Whereas now if I say yes to 10 things but do more, I actually have a bigger impact.
Yes.
And also it doesn't come with such significant costs to
Yeah.
my well-being, as you know that I tend to abuse from time to time. So I think that it would be like it's okay. It's okay to say no, but the things you say yes to, you like go all in,
Yeah.
rather than go say yes to everything and be half-baked
Yes.
on a lot of things.
Yeah.
So I think that's where I remember, in some ways though, I don't regret saying yes to so many things because it got me great success in life.
Yeah.
But I knew, and I suppose my only probably regret is learning that it's okay to say no. It's like I should have, if I'd learnt that 10 or 15 years ago, I might have had a few more years less on the clock. That's what I'd just say to my 18-year-old self. But like you, whether I'd listen or not would be probably not. I would have said, I get it. I get that intellectually, but the identity would have struggled to adapt to that. So. Mark, this has been fantastic. It's great to use this format. Great to be able to reflect and deal with some of these questions and delve a bit deeper, but also try and, as we've learnt through all of this, yes, we've learnt from our guests, but it's also the learning we've done about ourselves, which I hold dearly in all of these processes. And just like we started, I just want to thank all of our guests, all of our clients who openly share with us.
Yes.
And every time they share with us, it allows us not only to work with them, to help them unearth something, but it helps us in our journey. And so I'll be forever thankful for every one of our clients that have done that. So
yeah,
I look forward to what the next chapter of our podcast and where it goes, and look forward to the ongoing exploration that we and the In Your Corner team will be doing. So
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.